First, you get the buckets ready, clean the pans and gather firewood. Late in the winter, it's maple syrup time. You need warm and sunny days, but still a cold and freezing nighttime. For just a few weeks, maple syrup time. We boil and boil and boil and boil it all day long, till 97% of water evaporates, just like this song. When what is left is syrupy, don't leave it too long. Sweep up the fire, maple syrup time. I know it's not the quickest system, but each year I can't resist it. Get out the buckets and tap the trees in time. Making it is half the fun and satisfaction when you're done. Get out the buckets, maple syrup time. My grandpa said perhaps it's just a waste of time, but no more than my little way to make a happy little rhyme. So swing your tail, swing your buckets, keep in good time. So fill up the fire, maple syrup time. Buckets ready, clean the pans and gather firewood. Late in the winter, it's maple syrup time. You need warm and sunny days, but still a cold and freezing nighttime. For just a few weeks, it's maple syrup time. We boil and boil and boil and boil it all day long, till 97% of water evaporates, just like this song. When what is left is syrupy, don't leave it too long. Build up the fire, maple syrup time. Bring out the buckets, maple syrup time. Get out the buckets, maple syrup time. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Oh my goodness. So there's been a lot of wonderful discussions going on lately about some alternatives to toxic masculinity, looking for male role models that are a bit more wholesome. And I love the fact that, you know, people like Bob Ross and Mr. Rogers are finally getting their due. And I want to kind of chuck one other into the mix that I don't see enough of personally, and that's Pete Seeger. I recently dug this book out of my collection and finally gave it the thumbing through it really deserves. And I wanted to share some passages with you, starting with a little essay. These are all publications of his out of things like Sing Out and other publications where Pete, while he was alive, put some of his work. Not sure exactly which one this comes out of, but this one's called Folk Songs by You. He begins. Every folk singer should consider himself or herself a songwriter on the side. If you love folk songs, consider how they've been changed and improved through generations by singers who've added their own homegrown genius. For great songs to be written, we must have an outpouring of topical song. What does it matter that most will have been sung once and forgotten? The youthful Joe Hills, Tagros, Burnses, and Shakespeares and Guthries can only thus get their training. Time will sift the good from the bad, and perhaps centuries from now, when we're all crumbled to dust, some child in a world which has long since proceeded to tackle other problems besides how to ban the bomb will be singing a verse which you tossed off in a moment of inspiration. Many articles and books have been written on the subject of how to write a song. They tell the inspiring amateur to be simple, be clever, have a gimmick, be this, be that. I doubt have and I doubt have produced many new songwriters. Sorry about that. I swear I can read. Yet here we go again with another attempt. A really outstanding song is rare, but it's easier than you think to write a usable song. Your song must paint a picture or tell a story to make your ideas come to life. Learn to make it rhyme. Learn to create images, develop them, and hold your listeners in suspense. A rhymed editorial is worse than useless. It is not art. Phooey. Stinko. He really wrote that. Underline this. An editorial in rhyme does not make a song. Since it is harder to make a complete song than a fragment of one, first practice by writing verses to tunes you know, or writing new tunes for verses you hear. Try them out on your friends. If it isn't good enough for you to repeat to your friends, it probably isn't good enough to print. So try again. After a couple dozen successful but random verses, you may be able to carry through conception and create a complete song. Don't be afraid to make it specific. A song which hits home, goes right to the point, is worth more at that instant than any other song in your repertoire, and is worth, for that instant alone, the time it took to compose it, even though perhaps a week later it will be out of date and useless. One California woman, Malvina Reynolds, is responsible for at least a dozen of my favorite songs of the last 2 decades. In a footnote, he including Little Boxes, What Have They Done to the Rain, God Bless the Grass, Where Are You Going, My Little One, and so on. Her creations have been eagerly listened to and sung and modified by thousands, some of them by millions, of people who found that she put into words and music exactly what they had been wanting to say. When I meet a potentially good songwriter who is about to give up writing because of his or her efforts met with so little visible response, I tell them Malvina's story. I think some of you aspiring musicians and other creative types ought to hear this. At age 45, with a PhD in English literature, but never having held a job as a teacher, blacklisted, but still full of ambition, she meets some guitar pickers and singers. This is the kind of stuff I'd like to do, she says to herself. The first thing she finds is it's not so easy to write a simple song. Since others were not singing her songs enough, she bought a guitar and learned how to plunk on it in a rudimentary way. Many laughed at her amateurish efforts, but she was not going to give up. After several years, she had 1 or 2 mild successes. She found herself handicapped by not knowing how to write down her tunes, so she went to school to learn music notation. She tries writing every conceivable type of song: mad, sad, glad, happy, sappy, serious, curious, loud, soft. She gets a home copying machine and sends copies to every singer she knows and to folk song publications here and abroad. With a scratchy voice, she keeps on performing. At age 69, she's a good craftsman as a songwriter. She knows what she can do best and what she can't. She knows what a song can do and what it can't. She formed her own publishing company so as not to have to give 50% of royalties to someone else, and she makes a steady, small income from it all. But some of her best songs are made up just for 1 or 2 people. She spent a weekend with family in Rhode Island and wrote a song for them describing the household. It was a great song. I wanted to sing it myself, but she said no. It was private, and best remains so. Malvina really is one of my heroines. She refuses to give up on the human race. One of her best poems was sent out as a New Year's greeting a couple years ago. If this world survives, and every other day I think it might, in good part it will be because of the great souls in our community. There are a lot of them. I've seen them walk in lonely thousands down a city streets, or stand in vigils in the rain, or turn the handle of a print machine, or empty their purses as the box came by, or face into the camera's eye and answer the question, will the world survive? And they have said, we'll try. We'll try. Make it a practice to write 1 new song or verse a week, no matter how few ever hear it. Increase your knowledge of language, rhythm, and melody. Not only this, a deep and instinctive feeling for the hearts and minds of the people you sing to must develop in you. You must express for them what is in their hearts by expressing what is in your own. In this way, you both lead and serve the people. Of course it isn't easy. Whoever said it was? Isn't that a good idea? Oh my goodness. This book is just full of them. I've got a couple other selections marked out here for us. Here's something that some of my friends might enjoy. Music and organized labor. Golly gee, what? Why would I be interested in that? Like hymns and patriotic songs, Union songs are songs with a message. Put together, the ballads, anthems, and ditties composed by American Union members would tell you the best part of the history of the American labor movement. Unlike most hymns and patriotic songs, Union songs are usually composed by amateurs to suit a particular occasion and have a short life. More often than not, they're simply new words to an older melody. A few of such songs, however, prove worthwhile enough in melody and lyrics to warrant being passed on by one generation of workers to the next. Heading of the next part is a question: whatever happened to singing in the unions? And that's a wonderful question. When I first joined a union, I wondered the same thing myself, and I ended up leading a few songs now and then. Except in a few unions, there was not as much singing as some people now suppose. From listening to the Talking Union record and reading a couple of novels about the early labor struggles, some jumped to the conclusion that the United States was full of class-conscious harmonizing in those days. Tain't true. The singingest union America ever had was the Old Wobblies. Their official name was the Industrial Workers of the World. Was, I think he meant is. Started in Chicago in June of 1905 by Big Bill Haywood of the Western Federation of Miners and others who were dissatisfied with the lack of progress from the little old craft unions under Sam Gomper's American Federation of Labor. The IWW quickly grew to 150,000 before World War I. It was put down then by the government because of its opposition to the war, made an upsurge after the war, and then in the early 1920s dwindled to a fraction of its own strength. They were definitely a radical group, mostly anarchist syndicalists of a sort, and they argued bitterly with socialists as to the value of trying to elect working-class congressmen. Their idea was to ultimately sign up all the workers to one big union, improve their conditions, and eventually call a general strike to decide who was going to run the world, the bosses or the workers. With every new union card, they also handed out a little red songbook. The cover carried a motto: to fan the flames of discontent. Inside were the words to about 50 songs, usually parodies of well-known melodies, pop songs of the day, hymns, or older tunes commonly sung. Their best-known songwriters were Joe Hill and Ralph Chaplin, both of whom rose from the ranks to become full-time organizers from the IWW. The latter's song, Solidarity Forever, is officially sung at many a labor union convention, but I'll bet Joe Hill's Casey Jones becomes a more permanent part of American folklore. The songs were roared out by Wobblies at meetings, on picket lines, and in jails, where IWW men were often put by the thousands, on freight trains through South Dakota filled with migrant harvest hands for the wheat fields, or wherever Wobblies happened to meet. If the Salvation Army was preaching against them from the one street corner, they might set up a soapbox in the opposite corner. When the Salvation Army band started up in the sweet by and by, Wobblies would use it to accompany their own singing of Joe Hill's parody, Pie in the Sky. Prior to the IWW, labor songs were not unknown, but they were by no means common. The 8-hour day movement of the 1880s had some. By researching old union records and newspapers, one could probably compile a list of thousands of songs made up during this or that strike. But when the strike was over, usually the songs were forgotten, as might be the songs of some war after the armistice is signed. Excuse me. The music of these songs often reflected the folk background of the workers involved. Thus, The anthracite miners of Pennsylvania might have Irish or Slavic tunes for their strike songs. In the southern states, one could find old English ballad melodies or hymn tunes with new words made up by the country people who came down to work in the textile mills. During the 1920s and 30s, some of the northern city unions, such as the International Ladies Garment Workers, also printed songbooks. They had many immigrant members who had an old world love of singing. Often they joined choruses, which rehearsed to perform at rallies and May Day parades. In 1935, the CIO was formed, again to try to do the job not being done by the conservative old craft unions. There was a wave of organizing drives throughout the country that produced a flood of parodies to pop melodies. The Flint sit-down strikers, who took over the General Motors plant there in 1935, sang, "When we walked out on you, we set you back on your heels. Goody, goody, so you lost some money, and now you know how it feels. Goody, goody." And they had many more songs like it. But again, when the strikes were over, the songs were usually forgotten. In 1940, I learned the song "Which Side Are You On" from a folklorist who had been researching in eastern Kentucky in 1932. Later, I met Mrs. Reese, who wrote the song. At that time, it was unknown, except in the memories of her family and a few miners of Harlan County who heard her daughters sing it at the 1932 Union meetings. In the 1930s, as in the 1960s, it was the black people of the South, with their fine traditions of church singing, who provided some of the best songs picked up throughout the country. "We Shall Not Be Moved" is supposed to have come out of one of the organizing drives of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in the early 30s. It was originally "Jesus is my captain, I shall not be moved," but significantly, the new words were not anti-religious, as were the wobbly parodies. They simply emphasized a militancy that was always present in the older spirituals. "It's that Union train a-comin' was once the old ship of Zion. Roll the Union on recalls roll the chariot along," and also came out of the 1935 sharecropper struggles. This and a number of other songs were put together by Union people studying at Commonwealth College, Arkansas, a Union school of the 30s. The 1941 Talking Union recording represented an attempt to carry on the tradition and spread it through the North and the West, but then the war came and the Union drives were shelved until Hitler was beaten. In 1946, the former Almanac singers and others joined to form the People's Songs Organization, with the idea of reviving folk and labor songs through the unions of the nation. But now the Cold War came along, and American labor unions kicked out most of the militants and radicals, the very ones who had always been the enthusiastic singers and songwriters. Even unions with left-wing leadership felt they had to concentrate on pork chops to the exclusion of songbooks and choruses. A West Coast longshoreman told me that at the 1952 ILWU in Seattle convention, a group of newly organized Hawaiian workers marched enthusiastically into the convention hall singing Union songs. Why, all our mainland delegates turned around in surprise. They hadn't seen anything like this in a long time. Today, a few unions still publish songbooks. A few still even have choruses, but on average, only 3% of the union members attend union meetings, except during crises. And the songbooks are by and large unused. In 1968, Wallace for President buttons sprouted on the lapels of officials of local unions, and Union Maid is a far better known on college campuses than it is in the average union hall. And this is what happened to singing in the unions. If all this is disillusioning, let me add one thing. History shows that there is a hidden heritage of militancy, which comes and goes but never completely dies. It undergoes transformations and permutations from century to century, but the lessons learned by one generation, even through defeat, are passed on to the next. In the 1960s, many of the song traditions of the 1930s have seen new life as never before in the freedom songs of the South and in the topical songs of many a campus. Mrs. Florence Reese, wife of a rank-and-file organizer for the old National Miners Union in Harlan County, Kentucky, was at home one day in 1931. when High Sheriff J.H. Blair and his deputies, they were really company gun thugs, she said, came to her house. One of her little girls started to cry. "What are you crying for?" said a deputy. "We ain't after you. We're after your old man." They poked their rifles into closets, under beds, even into piles of dirty clothes, and finally left. Mrs. Reese tore an old calendar off the wall and wrote these now famous verses. She fitted them to an old hymn tune, and her little girls used to sing it at the Union Hall. It seems only right that I should bust it out for you now. Which side are you on? 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 Come on, you good workers, good news to you I'll tell, of how the good old Union is coming here to dwell. Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? They say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a Union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Oh, workers, can you stand it? Oh, tell me if you can. Will you be a lousy scab, or will you take your stand? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Don't scamp for the bosses, don't listen to their lies. Us poor folks haven't got a chance unless we organize. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, sweet Jesus? Which side are you on? I love that song. And I think that Pete Seeger would be really thrilled to see the Rebel Diaz version of that. If you're not familiar, I'll link it down below. But it's an amazing remix and an amazing hip-hop re-envisioning of Mrs. Reese. And it makes a great hook. And, I think it's wonderful. So I've got another bit from the book here. We've got The Man Who Never Died. It took nearly 40 years for the first book to be published, which gave the true facts on the life and death of Joe Hill, legendary songwriter and organizer for the Wobblies between 1911 and 1915. Half of Barry Stavis' book is an absorbing play. The other half is a documentary preface quoting letters and newspaper articles at the time. If you read it through, you will feel that for the first time, you really know Joe as a friend and person. For a wonderful person he was, brave, generous, lighthearted and gay, single-mindedly devoted to his cause, thoughtful towards others, and always militant. He arrived in the United States from Sweden in 1900, 19 years old, and took the name of Joseph Hillstrom. 11 years of miscellaneous jobs followed, harvesting wheat in the Dakotas, shipping out to Honolulu. He wrote his first well-known Union song in 1912 while involved in a longshore strike in San Pedro, California. Within a few short years, hundreds of thousands of copies of the Little Red Wobbly songbooks had carried his parodies of popular songs of the day, hymns, and folk tunes. He wrote ballads to order for lumberjacks in the Northwest and textile workers of New England. In 1914, he was framed in Salt Lake City on a murder charge, and in spite of pleas from around the world, including attempted intervention by President Wilson and the Swedish government, he was shot by a Utah firing squad on November 19th, 1915. An immense job of research faced Barry Stavis when he undertook his book in 1948. To begin with, the complete court records of Joe's trial had mysteriously disappeared from the county clerk's office in Salt Lake. In addition, all the records of the office of the IWW, which Joe himself counted on to ultimately vindicate him, were either seized by federal agents during World War I or had burned in a disastrous fire that gutted the Chicago headquarters of the organization a few years later. Nevertheless, using newspaper accounts which quoted verbatim from the trial and other sources, such as the large collection of Joe's letters to Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, then 25 years old, who helped to organize his defense, a completely creditable reconstruction has been made. Stavis points out at several points that a definitive biography is still to be written. Within his space limitations, he could give little more than an extended essay. But his documentation is sufficient to give the lie to several slanderous writings on Joe Hill. These writings are a novel, The Preacher and the Slave by Wallace Stenger, an article in the Industrial and Labor Relations Review, The Legend of Joe Hill by Vernon Jensen, and a chapter in American Folk Songs of Protest by John Greenway. One or more of the following points were made in these three pieces. 1. That he was guilty. 2. His songs were no good. 3. He was just a hobo and had no influence. While Joe Hill's parody of a Salvation Army hymn added pie in the sky to nearly everyone's vocabulary, we also owe him the Union version of Casey Jones and probably Hallelujah, I'm a Bum. Others well worth remembering include Tramp, 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 Keep on a Tramping, The Rebel Girl, There is Power, and Mr. Block. He himself would be the last one to claim great credit as a musician. He liked to rattle the ivories on pianos in the Union halls and knew how to notate his songs, but little more. But he had a real flair for lyrics. All his life he had scribbled, as he called it. Probably hundreds of parodies of popular songs were made up by him which will never be known. Only 2 of his songs, Casey Jones and Pie in the Sky, have been on the all-time Union hit parade, it's true. Others have fallen into disuse because of the very qualities that made them so timely and acute in 1913 make them now as obsolete as yesterday's newspapers. Some of his finest efforts are rarely sung simply because the melodies have been forgotten or are never reprinted because of copyright restrictions. From time to time in recent years, the November 19th anniversary of Joe's execution has been memorialized with a program of his songs. They bring his presence close. To the singers, it must seem as though he peered over their shoulders occasionally, with a grin creasing his features, as though to say, "'Pears to me you're making a lot too much fuss over me personally, but if it helps organize the OBU, go to it, brother." I think old Pete paints a really interesting picture there. With the Salvation Army on one corner and the Wobblies on the other. In many cities across the United States, when the Wobblies were first coming to prominence, they were passing all kinds of legislation saying who could stand out on a stump somewhere and who couldn't. And guess who they wanted to outlaw? Guess who was in need of standing up for free speech back in the day? That was the Wobblies. And they would promise you everything. They would promise you the moon, the stars in the sky. Just stay away from those nasty, dirty Reds over the street. Long-haired preachers come out every night, trying to tell me what's wrong and what's right. When we ask them for something to eat, they will tell you in voices so sweet, you will eat by and by. Oh gosh, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, the spirit went out of me for a second there. But you can see how that you will eat by and by. And of course, over the road they're singing, in the sweet by and by, we will meet on that beautiful shore. But of course, that's the way it goes. Yes. Singing audiences. Now, this is something that I want to see a lot more of. We've got a beautiful spring coming up. Oh, geez. We've got a beautiful spring coming up, and May Day is right around the corner. I want to see more singing from all our different struggles out there in the world. And if you want some help, pick up this book. And there's so much great advice, whether you want to sing, whether you want to play an instrument, whether you'd like to lead singing or write your own songs, or just get a better appreciation for Pete and his mission, and get a real sense of tradition, not just what the reactionaries out there tell you that tradition is. Pete understands the living, breathing essence of these traditions in a way that internet reactionaries could only dream of. But anyway, singing audiences. The revival of audience singing is an integral part of the whole revival of interest in folk songs. Consider the matter historically. It is only within recent human history that such emphasis has been put upon professional solo singers. In primitive tribes, all songs, except for the long narratives, were sung by everyone. If a song had a chorus, everybody in the audience naturally sang it. Modern civilization developed highly professional specialists in the arts as well as the sciences. But comes the time when the intelligent person will say, hold on, just because we have cars is no reason to forget how to walk. Because we have books is no reason to forget how to tell a good story. Because we have cameras is no reason to forget the fun of wielding a pencil and brush. And because we have the phonograph is no reason to forget how to make music. The apex of a pyramid can only be as high as the base is broad. We cannot have great professionals unless we also have many amateur participants. How can one have big league baseball teams unless there are many sandlot players? Pardon me. If we really love folk music, we will get audiences singing with us, no matter that occasionally it may slow down a song. Tempos may drag, or we may have to abandon some beautiful harmony or spectacular effect. Actually, the quality of audience singing has improved tremendously in the last 25 years. When I first started singing folk songs, it was like pulling teeth to get anyone to sing with me. I had to use all sorts of tricks to coax a tune out of a crowd that had never sung together in its entire life. Today, I can ask people to sing counterpoint or counter rhythms, softly or loudly, fast or slow, to revel in improvised harmony. Anybody can if they want to try. This type of audience singing is a far cry from the raucous cry of that old gang of mine on a Saturday night in Old Joe's barroom. People are singing here because the songs are more than maudlin sentiment. This type of audience singing is different, too, from the average middle-class church where the congregation limps along half a beat behind the organ. Those who love folk songs can recall the warm feeling of a mass of people singing together. They can also remember the awkward times when a song leader, out of tune with the audience, tried unsuccessfully to get a group to loosen up and sing. One of the least appealing things in the field of music is the spectacle of someone trying to read the words off a song sheet at the same time we link, come on, everybody, let's sing now. Yeah. Followed by a waving of the arms like as not out of rhythm with the piano. It is a tribute to the lasting quality of folk music that such performances have not been able to kill it. No two audiences are alike, and the leader must be prepared to improvise and feel their way until leader and audience are in tune with one another. At first, be wary of songs that are too strange or difficult. A song too unfamiliar, stale, or trite. A song too familiar, stale, or trite can be just as bad. Take long enough to explain the part you want the audience to sing with you, but not too long. If the song is unfamiliar, take long enough to describe the background of the song so that the words are meaningful. But too much talking is the death of music. Often, the main problem is how to loosen an audience up and make them lose self-consciousness. A good belly laugh is one of the best ways to do this, but don't risk the sour aftertaste of an unsuccessful attempt at humor. Perhaps more than any trick or artifice, it's best simply to enjoy yourself completely and trust that it will be catching. The song leader should be having so much fun that the audience joins in without being able to help itself. Little things help. Pitch a song in a key everyone can sing. In the beginning, it's better to be too low than too high. Only low altos and basses can really go below a G. Only real tenors and sopranos can be counted on to be comfortable above a C or a D, an octave and a half higher. Certain songs need a warm and relaxed feeling and must be pitched as low as possible. Others have an occasional high note which, to sound right, must be at the top of everyone's range. Small children can sing 2 or 3 tones higher than adults. As for teenagers, no two voices alike. Accompaniment. A few songs need none, but we are so used to the rhythmic chords that some songs seem incomplete without them. Guitars and banjos are good because the sharp punctuation of the plucked string points out the rhythm without obscuring the melody. Rhythm and pacing are most important. This is why it's such a help to play one's own accompaniment. It is more important than being an exact pitch or knowing the most appropriate harmonies, nice as those may be. Rhythm can be given to the singers not just by the sound of the accompaniment, but by the sight of an arm, or the whole body moving, or the feel of a foot tapping on the floor. How to keep a large audience in rhythm? Main strength. Keep the tempo, but don't expect a large audience to be able to keep up with a fast hoedown. Rhythm can be oppressive too, so afford relief from it occasionally. Vary it, and at some times abandon strict time for free cadence. Make the songs longer rather than shorter. It is as difficult to have a good 2-minute song fest as it would be to have a good 2-minute football game. Of course, if the music is of poor quality to begin with, even 15 seconds is too long. But in many black churches, the best congregational singing comes when the song has lasted not 4 or 5 minutes, but 10 or 15 minutes. It is not impossible to have good short songs, but better make them solos. The group sound steadily improves, even when the song is repeated twice all the way through. You get warmed up to the task. It's as simple as that. Someday, perhaps in our lifetime, we will see an American population which can sing as readily and as beautifully together as many underdeveloped peoples can today. We will sing together with harmony, rhythm, and good tone, which we do not always have at present. Meanwhile, we song leaders have a long way to go in learning how to help audiences sing with us. Needed. Not only songs with choruses, refrains, and responses, not only rousing, spirited songs, but quiet and deeply moving songs as well. Composers! Can you compose for an audience? Of course, a program of folk songs should not be all audience participation. Narrative songs, lullabies, often sound better sung by one person, just as they often sound better unaccompanied by any instrument. The art of programming is an art in itself. 99% depends on the particular needs of the audience and the way a performer feels on that particular day. But if between ballads and solos we can help our neighbors in front of us realize some of their own potentialities as singers, we will be doing a service for our country. Somehow, somewhere along the line, Americans must learn, as our grandparents knew, that it is fun to create for yourself. The problem: how to be a whole human being in a machine and monopoly age. Ultimately, rank and file participation in music goes hand in hand with creativity on other planes, arts, sciences, and yes, even politics. And on that note, I believe I will end the stream. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.